Hey everybody, it's Greg. I would suggest we get started, and I would assume some more people will roll in as we go. Please take the poll. We'll stop at a couple of points in the presentation for you to ask questions, and towards the end there will be another poll. We would love your feedback. I am joined today by Daniel.
Hello, everyone.
Partner at career.pm.
Hey.
Hey, Daniel. We started career.pm last year. We launched a few weeks ago. We will talk a tiny bit about career.pm at the end. But first, let's jump in and talk about product discovery. This is a term that is gaining in popularity, the entire concept. I think it is starting to be kind of bastardized or changed. We'll talk a little bit about that. But we consider product discovery this process of finding market opportunities that merit incremental investment for a product company. And quite frankly, I would broaden that to talk about offerings, not just products, but also services, solutions. So the idea is, in some industries, especially B2B, this is big bet territory, and I want to de-risk that stuff. So once there's been a trigger, and we'll talk about that, I want to assess the market opportunity around problems that I see. I want to convince myself that there is a viable business opportunity. And here we're talking about incremental investment. We're not talking about day-to-day processing of requirements and managing the backlog. This is where we will probably need to go get approval from leadership for incremental budget for something. So once again, we're not really talking about just general kind of input or requirements management. We're not talking about just some session I get together and do one afternoon with some other people. This is not some UX-led thing where I'm trying to come up with the next great mobile app. It's not just about finding new products, although that's probably the center of gravity. What I'm trying to, manage here are big investments. So maybe I have an existing product, but we want to take it in a new direction or add functionality that is really significant and could be very risky. So we want to analyze our plans and make sure that the risk is worthwhile. We're also not trying to come out of this with a completely designed and functioning product. Not the idea. I'm going to talk about the start and end of the process as we go. So some tough truths are that it's really hard to do for non-trivial problems, non-trivial solutions. It can be very risky in that you can invest a lot of time and find out that there's simply not an opportunity there. Maybe a competitor enters the market and erodes the opportunity. But it's super important because having this capability can really continuously or sustainably generate competitive advantage. So it's hard, risky, but can be very worthwhile. And when we talk about viability, what are we talking about? Like, where do we see things go wrong very often? We've all read about startups or been part of startups. The kind of things that go wrong are the big risks, or are that we come up with a solution that simply isn't valued sufficiently by the market. Maybe we understood the problems, but the market isn't ready to pay what we need to develop the solution. I see a lot of companies that focus on their customers, the people who have already bought the product, at the expense of looking at the broader market or the rest of the market. Sometimes I just don't solve the problem sufficiently and don't determine that until it's too late. And what I see in a lot of startups, and I'm sure you've seen as well, is what I will call insufficient unfair advantage. And market entry is a great example of that. The idea is just too simple, and in no time, it's a very crowded market and maybe filled with people who are better able to capitalize on it than you are. So what we will do today is talk about product discovery as a practice. That's a term that I've coined. It's a simplified representation of a knowledge worker kind of process. So knowledge work is not linear, but that doesn't mean we can't think about it in a structured way. So no two iterations of product discovery are going to be the same. Practice is designed to help you get your head around it, provide some guide rails, help you avoid making common mistakes without prescribing that you do specific things, right? So I wouldn't go through this kind of practice. I wouldn't go through product discovery for some little incremental investment. That's better handled just by your requirements management process, your release management process. This is for, big stuff. First question is, what triggers product discovery? Why do I do it in the first place? It can be a lot of things. I may just spot a new opportunity. Something has changed, a law has changed. Another product has uncovered an opportunity that I wasn't aware of. New technology does this all the time. I might just have an idea. I might see that my business is stagnating and I need to look at, new avenues to continue to have the business success I've had in the past. Sometimes my competition does something that I have to respond to. So a lot of things can trigger this. If we think about it like a black box, what we're going to talk about in this webinar is what is inside the black box. But at this highest level, trigger gets me started. I need to know my business motivation. That's my vision, goals, objectives, strategy. I have to think about what my brand positioning is. Those are the things that I take into the exercise. What comes out is a lot of stuff. And how I present that is contextual, but I'm going to do some problem analysis. I should come out of this with a representation of the business model. I should come out of this with a business case or justification. And along those lines, we can think about product discovery starting when there's a trigger that I choose to respond to and ending when I have an investment decision. So product discovery isn't about iteratively creating the final solution. It's about getting to the point that I decide, okay, I'm willing to accept the risk. This is what I plan to build. This is how much I expect it to cost. Let's go. And then we're into more traditional product development. And you can imagine that you're managing these things all the time. All kinds of problems and opportunities are popping up. They may come from stakeholders. They may come from the internal team. And, it's basically a funnel problem. I need to capture those things. I need to make sure they're on strategy. I need to make sure that there is pull from the market for those things. And the things that make it through the funnel are things that I would consider, for formal discovery. And this is, once again, significant new development that we're talking about. So I will stop for a minute and, ask folks. You can type into the chat. I don't see any open questions so far. So I would just continue, but at any time, feel free to jump in, ask a question, and I'll take another look at these more toward the end. And yeah, we can talk about those things. So a practice is defined as a set of high-level phases. You should not take away from this that this is some kind of waterfall-y thing that you have to go through these sequentially one time. The idea is to get your head around the overall process, avoid common mistakes, and each one of these phases, we'll go into more detail, has exit criteria, and that's really important. So what we're saying here is you start with a little bit of planning. That may be 5 or 10% of the overall time. Think before you act. That's the simple message. Who's going to be involved? What am I trying to accomplish? What does success look like? I am then going to go into a phase where I'm primarily concentrated on problem analysis. What does that mean? That I shouldn't jump to the solution. I should start understanding the problem, make sure that I have validated my understanding of the problem, and then move on to the solution. Solution discovery is a phase where I am more focused on finding, ideally, multiple solutions for the problems that I've identified. And part of the process will be to pick the best one. Ideally, I have a couple of things that I could do. I think about them and I do the best one. Then I need to look into the business model. And this is an early viability check. Do I have something here that is viable, that will meet my business expectations? If I do, if I feel like there is a viable business model, I can move on and start doing justification. And that means really looking at what I'm trying to achieve from a business perspective and convincing myself that this solution, that solving this problem is worthwhile. And just like anything else, there should be some follow-up. When you go through this, you should do a retrospective, you should archive the materials. That's probably a very small percentage of the overall time. Most of your time is going to be spent probably ideally in problem analysis, understanding the problems. This overall process can take a few days, it can take months, it depends on the complexity of the problems that you're solving. So now what we will do is look at a profile for each of the phases. So today we're going to go through this at a very high level. What we will do in the coming weeks is deep dives into some of the activities that we discussed, treat these phases in more detail. So if I look at planning, here I'm going to form a team very often, get a few people together. I'm going to set some milestones. I am not going to do a full-blown project plan. This is something you can probably do in an hour or less. But an important part of it is setting goals, for what I want to achieve. One of the things that I will create is called a lean plan. And later in the presentation, I will take you through an example of a lean plan. But what I want to do here is identify who the stakeholders are. I want to avoid wasting time later in practice as I execute it. A couple of tools that I can use here very early on, I can whip out the lean canvas. I do this a lot and just do a very kind of naive run through that thing to see if I find really big gaps. I can exit and move on. I can consider myself as having moved past this phase when I've identified the team and when I've completed the lean plan. So that is planning. Very quickly thinking about what I'm doing. When we look at the lean plan, you'll see the structure there. Next phase, super important. I want to identify the problems I want to solve. I want to make sure I understand them, and I want to validate those to make sure that I really understand the problem. Far too often, we jump to the solution. So here I'm going to brainstorm on who the stakeholders in the market might be. I can do interviewing. We have a tool called a problem profile. We'll talk about that perhaps in another webinar. And yeah, you can see we have a set of tools that can be used there. Some of them are generic, like you can use the job to be done approach. I consider that a problem solving methodology or a problem oriented methodology. And you know that you've done enough problem analysis when you've identified the problems, gathered key information about them, and have validated them. And once you've done that, you can start thinking about the business opportunity around solving those problems, irrespective of the solution that you pick. And that's one of the powerful kind of elements of product analysis, is I can look at the problems, I can attach economic value to those things, and I can think, wow, if I could solve this problem completely, that is $5 billion a year. If I can solve it partially for part of the market, this is what the opportunity looks like. Let's continue. Let's now think about how we could solve these problems. Or at this point, you can consider this a decision gate. I may say, you know what, there's just no opportunity there. Sounded like a great idea, but the opportunity isn't there. In the solution exploration phase, I'm doing exactly what the name denotes. I'm thinking about different solutions, how I could solve it, what those things look like. This is what a lot of people associate product discovery with. Defining the MVP, identifying the personas, doing prototyping, all those kinds of things. All of them are valid and valuable, but they can be expensive. So making sure you nail the problems you're solving and that those are recognized by the market is a good idea before you get here. A lot of tools you can use. Value proposition canvas is one that I've used. We have a tool that helps you generate value proposition statements. You really want to understand the value you intend to deliver to the folks who buy your product. You know that you're ready to move on when you have alternatives identified. When for the most likely solution that you would build, you have a decent description. This isn't a full design at all. And when you feel like you understand the market where you're going to sell this thing. What are the key dynamics? Who are the competitors? This doesn't have to be absolutely complete. The goal here is to convince yourself that, there is a market for this thing and that you can build the solution. Next phase, Once I have a solution, I should build a business model for it. And business models are solution specific. I use the lean canvas a lot to capture the business model. I prefer it to the business model canvas. You can use whatever tool you want, but the idea at this point is to look for big gaps. For example, you may have a great solution, but realize you have no channel. You may have an innovative solution, but realize you don't have an unfair advantage, or you don't really have a unique value proposition. So it's time to go back and think. But here I would seek to complete the business model as defined, perhaps in a canvas. I would think about gaps. By design, those things don't cover things like competition, key risks. So we have some tools there that you can use. Next, if I feel like I have a viable business model, I would make a decision to do a business justification. I don't call this a business case. That can be a lot of work. There are leaner ways to do that. But you can think of this essentially as the same kind of thing that I would do with a business case. There, I really collect the best information I have. I do forecasting around revenue and cost, and I start making commitments about, my expectation of the business impact of this thing. And almost by definition at this point, I need a decision, an investment decision. And for all intents and purposes, once that decision is made, in our definition, product discovery is over. You would start moving to product development. You may still have some big open questions. You may do some of the activities, but managing those things is a little bit different than what you've spent your time doing getting to this investment decision. Remember that we're talking about a significant incremental investment. So at career.pm, we have an entire course on building product business cases. It's a bit different than a business case for a product or for maybe a new company. And yeah, the idea behind this practice is that you can scale this thing up and down to your desire. So if you're in a big company and this is really a big bet, the business case is probably going to be pretty detailed and will likely be dictated to you by the organization. If this is a startup, you may just do 10 slides that have the key elements of a business case, and you may decide, you know what, this looks pretty good. If we can, deliver on the most likely case, this could be a really nice business for us. The last phase is really kind of housekeeping, but a lot of people overlook it. So if this was a non-trivial thing, you may have been talking to a lot of people. You may be talking to people in sales. You may be talking to some of your best customers or prospects. You may have engaged marketing or leaders from other organizations. You may talk to all kinds of people. Here is kind of a reminder to go follow up with those people and tell them, hey, product discovery is winding down. We have a decision to go ahead, and this is our plan. You also want to do a retrospective with the people who are involved in your discovery effort, because you want to get better and better. You want to continuously improve. Super important. So organizations that know how to do this or are going to develop more competitive advantage over time than ones who don't. You want to put the artifacts in a well-defined place so that you can find them later, so that they're not just floating around. There can be sensitive information there, and so that you can revisit them and learn. The next time you need to do product discovery, you can go look at those things. If things don't go the way you planned, if you missed an opportunity, if things didn't work out, you can go back and recreate some of the decision-making that went into that and hopefully leave a wiser person. So that is the final phase. What I would like to do is I'm going to stop here. I'm looking at the question and answer window. I don't see any questions there. Daniel, I don't know if there are questions in the chat.
We just had one for about documenting the value proposition canvas, and we settled that over chat. And yeah, I just wanted to make sure that when we launch our next poll, that everyone is able to see it. So if for some reason you don't see the window pop up, just let us know when we launch our next poll to make sure that everyone's able to participate. There were some issues for some people on the first one, but yeah, other than that, I think we're good to go.
Great. So I will run you through this example, and we're in the home stretch here. So this is the kind of lean plan I would put together at the beginning of product discovery effort. Almost by definition, this is not a trivial thing. So depending on the size of what you're doing, this could be a 15-minute exercise, it could be a 50-minute exercise, but it's a little bit of time that you invest to make yourself more efficient as you go. So I would keep a change history, major changes to this thing. Product discovery is a team sport, and keeping everybody aligned and knowing what's going on is important. I would list the team contacts, who's involved in this thing. If you have a question about this discovery effort from an engineering perspective, whom would you speak with? Here's just a really quick, like, who's accountable for this thing? What's the organization? What are we trying to accomplish? And this is super important. It's an elevator pitch about my discovery effort. Why am I doing this? What do I plan to achieve? And here what we see is that a PM went a couple of years ago and sold a bold new vision to the board and now wants to rethink it. It's a kind of surveillance app. A couple of years ago, PM went to leadership and said, we should use drones, UAVs, as a mobile video platform. That could differentiate us. Now what he's doing, Arna is going back to them and saying, you know what? That was a good idea, but now we see the market around defending against drones heating up, and we should reconsider our strategy. I want to pursue that. I think we are uniquely able to capitalize on that market opportunity. You might list the deliverables you expect to come out of this thing. That is great for other stakeholders, for everybody. Start setting the bar in terms of, when are we done with this thing? What do we expect from it? What are the key risks to this effort? And in this case, they sell surveillance solutions to cities, so getting to the end users can be difficult. Because we just sold a bold vision a couple of years ago, it might be difficult now to reset folks. That's going to be a challenge. By the way, that is part of your job as a product manager. Even if you pitched something that turns out maybe not being the optimal path, it's about owning that, going back and saying, hey, based on the information I had then, that's what I proposed. I have a better proposal now. And there's some feasibility risk around this thing as well. What triggered this? Well, we just see what's going on in the market. There have been some, there are a lot of vendors that are announcing new kinds of technologies, but not really integrated solutions. And now we see UAVs or drones being used in attacks. And this was an attack that took place last year in Saudi Arabia that had a significant impact on world oil supply, or at least the price, the expectation of what could happen. And unfortunately, that's probably just, to use an unfortunate metaphor, the first shot across the bow. We will probably see more of this with fairly, with basically off-the-shelf technology. These days, you can do a lot of damage. So this area is heating up. The next thing I want to define is, what am I trying to achieve with my discovery? With the effort, not the end solution, but with the effort itself. Can't hurt to paint a vision. And then you have a set of goals and objectives. Goals are general, objectives are time-bound and measurable. And this is really something to rally the team around. This is how we will measure success of this discovery effort. It's nice to map your motivation to what the organization is trying to achieve so that people see that this is strategic. This isn't you just kind of going off and pursuing some pet project, that what you are pursuing really supports the overall org motivation. Think of that as the strategy and goals and objectives. I like this slide in a plan. Talk about what is out of scope. That can prevent a lot of unnecessary conversation. Really helps people focus on what is in scope. What are some of the key schedule drivers? Well, there's some competitive pressure. There's an event, and it would be great if we could launch there, if we had gotten far enough along that we can at least start messaging what we're doing, those kinds of things. And this is an important one. There is a portfolio review meeting. So that's where in our organization we go to pitch these kinds of ideas. And it would be great if we could just fit into the regularly scheduled meetings instead of having to do some kind of fire drill. What are the key milestones? This helps folks understand this isn't like some hard and fast schedule. It's just to give people an idea of the things that we would like to achieve. Like any project, this will be adjusted as we go. What do I need from stakeholders? Who are they? And what are the gaps? So you will need validation from sales. No exec is going to believe your projections of revenue unless sales is willing to step up and say, yeah, that looks doable. What have you already completed? Usually by the time you do a kickoff or bring people on board, things have already happened. Some things have happened. And then what are the next steps? So I didn't count the slides there. It's not that many. I think a really good use case is imagine that somebody joins the discovery effort, which is the tendency. You start with a core team that may be PM heavy. Over time, you need to bring on sales engineers. You need to bring on people from engineering to get estimates and so forth. Really nice to be able to just hand them this artifact, this lean plan, and say, this is what we're trying to accomplish. This is what we've done. This is who's involved. Saves a lot of onboarding time, which is really critical in terms of success. So once again, do not interpret what I've shown you as just some kind of waterfall-y thing. If this was just a few people in a startup, I might just capture all this on a couple of slides, the most important parts of it. If I'm in a bigger organization, I really want to show leadership that I've thought this through, and I want to show other stakeholders that I've thought this through. What's interesting is to think about the exit criteria for each of the phases, and that gives you insight into some of the common oversights or errors that people make when they're doing product discovery. So we have a phase called planning. Basic idea there is think before you act, rarely a bad idea. Next, make sure you understand the problem before you start prototyping and doing all those things. So overlooked in product development today. Next, make sure that there's a viable business model for the solutions that you come up with. At the business model level, you may encounter big gaps that change change the attractiveness of this new idea. The organization should be making explicit decisions about significant investments. This shouldn't be some submarine project. The business case helps there, or the business justification. And then as part of follow-up, we want to continuously improve because this is an important exercise to our organization. So, in summary, product discovery is a process. It's not a workshop. It's not usually something I can do in a couple of hours. In complex problem space, this thing can take months or longer. It can be very time consuming, so you should be careful about how you approach it and have checkpoints or gates so that if it's not yielding the results you expect, you stop it and move on to a better idea. Think about using the practice that I described. It can help you avoid common mistakes and give you guidance, and is just a framework, so very easy to customize to things that you need to do in your organization. There may be other gates, other artifacts, other roles, so you can extend that as you need. Every time it's going to be different. It's a creative process. So use your head. Don't follow anything blindly. Keep in mind what you're trying to achieve and be lean, be agile, and adapt as you go. So I see there's at least one question in the Q&A thread, so I'm going to address that. And then other folks can chime in there, or Daniel, I will ask you if we have any more questions in the comments.
Sure.
So folks, I think everybody can see the question and answer. It's a pretty lengthy question, but it starts with, how do we set business values from new product or service? Not only solving problems, but also revenue generation. Mapping out value proposition can be new. So these are just inherently difficult problems when I'm talking about something new, especially if it's addressing a market that hasn't been addressed, if I understand the question. So this is where this incremental approach that we described is so important. If you know nothing about the problem and know nothing about the solution, your organization probably has guidance on what is an acceptable opportunity. So, in some companies, you would never go to the board to get a 200,000 euro investment approved. In some companies, you would go for half of that. So take this incremental approach. And, you know, if your initial analysis reveals that there's just not a big opportunity there, you can stop. In terms of defining KPIs, very difficult. You know, it's very difficult to do, for example, pricing on something that you haven't fully scoped out, on something that addresses a new market. Most organizations have a slightly better handle on the cost side. I do not have any kind of silver bullet for this thing, for, you know, this question. There are a lot of elements. But if you think about following the practice, you are much less likely to waste time trying to figure something out. You know, a lot of people would jump to the solution and start thinking about pricing before they have validated that they really have a problem that the market is willing to pay to solve. I wish I could do this more justice. So Young, if there's something that more than I can elaborate on, please type, you know, yeah, respond there. Daniel, do we have other questions that appear?
Yeah, we have one. Yeah, I would just say to So Young, maybe add some more commentary on the chat that will help us provide a better answer for you. In the meantime, we also have a question on the chat area that says, is from Taras. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. Is what is the role of UX in producing product discovery deliverables? The mentioned outputs are problem analysis, stakeholder analysis, business model, business case, and investment decision. So what is the role of UX in producing product discovery deliverables?
Yeah, you know, it obviously depends on the extent to which the solution will involve end users. That sounds strange, but some solutions have very few end users, but they have a critical role. So as I, you know, start the planning, I need to make sure that I have their participation. If I think UX is going to be important in the software world, it almost always is. As I go into thinking about the problem, they can help me identify stakeholders, and they can help me identify challenges that those stakeholders face, irrespective of the problem. So if I want to learn, you know, really understand the pain of stakeholders, UX can be huge there. They can do research. And at that point, I'm not having them prototype or anything. I'm just having them research for this class of people. What are their challenges? And UX people, you know, UX researchers are really good at that kind of thing. And then, of course, once I get to solution exploration, they're going to be really important. Because once I feel like I have problems that are worthy of solving, I will want to start prototyping, doing wireframes, all the stuff that UX usually does. So how critical they are depends on the product. But in the software world, right, it's kind of hard to think of a situation where they just wouldn't be important at all. So doing this planning at the beginning, helping scope what you're trying to do, and getting a commitment from them early is really, I guess, critical. I hope that answers the question.
All right, yeah, and we have another question over here. It's from Romana, and she asks, you know, could we identify risk within the discovery process? That's her question.
Yeah, can we identify risk? So I'm not sure how to interpret that. Of course, you can identify risks. You know, there are a couple of different kinds of risks that I would call out. If we look at the lean plan, I talked about risks to the product discovery effort itself. But of course, there are a ton of risks associated with the, you know, solution that we're proposing. And absolutely, you would call those things out. I would keep, you know, an inventory of those things. That information will become critical when I create the business justification or the business plan. But that is something else that I can take into account at gates. If I've got a risk that is simply, you know, too big, that could contribute to my, you know, stopping the process and moving on to something else. So the risk will probably need to be, you know, explicit, the impact associated with them identified. At career.pm, we also have a risk matrix that you can use to calculate kind of an impact score based on the risks. So it can be done, it should be done, And by the time you get to building the business case or the business justification, you're probably not going to have much chance or much choice. Leadership is going to ask you to identify the biggest risks, and they're going to ask you how you plan to eliminate or mitigate them.
Romana, does that help? Right. In the meantime, we have another, okay, yeah, we have an affirmative from Romana. Yeah, we have another one from Kieran. He's asking about the role of things like jobs to be done in Discovery.
Yeah, so I referred to that when I talked about especially the problem analysis phase. I have been kind of on this problem bandwagon for a long time. I realized very early in my career that kind of common dysfunction, and it's just ingrained in us as humans. We jump to solutions. We hear a problem, and especially if we're an engineer, if we're a product person, we can imagine a million things that we could do to address a problem. And sometimes we don't go back and make sure we really understand the problems. So jobs to be done, if I think of that as an approach, a framework, can help me identify those problems. And they use a better term. They use, that a product does certain jobs. I think it's functionally equivalent to say that a product solves problems. So it's a different way of phrasing. And of course, there's a kind of body of knowledge and approach that's developed around jobs to be done. So I think it has the most relevance when you're thinking about the problems. But that methodology also, or whatever we want to call it, framework, I think it's perfectly compatible with this kind of loose framework that we've defined.
Yeah, and it's also a great way to align with marketing because it lets them align the messaging that you might have about your eventual new service with the discovery work that you've done. So it's also one of the advantages of this approach.
Yeah, for sure.
All right. Do we have more questions?
Okay, kind of testing my ability to, oops, here we go, use the webinar software. We have another poll, and I will try to release it. This one is feedback on the session. Guys, would really love your feedback, PM to PM. We're all about kind of continuous improvement. And while you're filling that out, I would like to give you a little more information. The next webinar at this point is scheduled for March 4th. And what we will do is jump into what we talked about in the business justification phase. And that is, how do you build a business case? And there we take the same approach. We have a practice around building a business case that you can scale up, scale down. Over the next few weeks, please join our community. We will get you a link in an email that we'll send out, or you can go directly there. I'll show you the link. You can join our Slack community, and over the next few weeks, we will deliver more and more templates. At the end of this webinar, we will make available to you this lean plan example so that you can use that in your product discovery efforts. This webinar was brought to you by career.pm. We are a career accelerator for product managers. We combine things like coaching, training, tools and templates, all kind of learning resources to build a personalized plan for you to accelerate your career. So I think, for a lot less than many courses cost, probably less than 1% of your salary, we can really help you plan the next steps in your career and upskill you for those things using the product management skills that you already have. That's kind of the theme, PM your career. And we have designed this thing to be super flexible. Daniel and I are product managers, kind of innately as well as professionally. So we have designed something that we think, and we're demonstrating with our membership up to now, is really valuable to product managers. That is our audience. We don't work with anybody else. And we can develop a program that you do on your schedule, reflects your priorities and on your budget. So if you think this might be right for you, We will send a link in the email. Would love to talk to you. You can schedule a quick consultation. We'll look at your situation and we can tell you whether or not we think we can be of value there. You can go to this link. You can join our network. We will make a recording of this webinar available to folks who are part of our community. We will make the lean plan template available immediately. And over the next few weeks, as I said, we will drip out other templates and so forth. So would love it if you would share your experience here, share the community link with folks in your network. And with that, I will say thank you. And I have time. If somebody has another question, I'm more than happy to try to answer it. Otherwise, would love to see you in our Slack community. Hope you will join our community and hope to see you on March 4th for the next webinar.